It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to be talking about Canelo versus Crawford on Netflix, how that deal finally came to fruition. We're going to look at some antitrust updates. We're going to talk about competition inside the UFC. We're going to talk about how the fighters are paid in the UFC. We're going to take a listener question and a whole lot more. But if you want access to all of that, you need to subscribe because some of it will be behind a paywall. John, how the heck are you? Because so much news has come out since our last episode.
Yeah, I mean, and so much of it has nothing to do with mixed martial arts or UFC or boxing. It's just this crazy news cycle. And then you're up there in the flood. Apparently, you are in a flood zone building Noah's Ark. That's my understanding of what's going on up there in Texas, or down there in Texas,
over from you.
Yeah.
When you're at your mom's, we're south of you, but when you're back home, we're east of you. And let me tell you, it has been raining nonstop since Tuesday. And last night was probably the worst because we lost power for about 6 hours. And when I happened to look at my my thermometer, today at 2:30, it was 72 degrees here. That's how much it rained in hot-ass Texas, where it's normally about 99 or 100 degrees at this time of year. It is, right now, it's only 80 degrees. It only came up 8 degrees over the course of the day. My yard looks like a lake, which, you know, isn't a bad thing. We always need the rain, but boy, it came down in buckets for the last couple of days to the effect of me losing power for a while.
Time to put in the koi pond.
Exactly. But we are out of the woods. It's about to be hot all over again, which kind of sucks because I really like the very tepid weather that we had for a few hours today.
It's an unbearable 80 degrees with no humidity here in Los Angeles, which I am pretty sure is north of you slightly. It's slightly north.
Slightly north. Okay.
I think because the Rio Grande goes south, and I think you guys you're south of the southernmost point of California. We're on the coast. So, well, the coast that counts, the Pacific coast.
Well, in any event, I'm glad that you're having good weather.
Oh, it's magnificent. Magnificent.
Our weather, our nice, wonderful 80 degrees will be gone by morning. And that's going to suck. So, without any further ado, though, we are going to get down to what all of our listeners come to hear. And that is some business talk. And our first question is a listener question from our good friend Beaton Finley Beaton. This came from Substack, and he has a question regarding the exclusive negotiating periods. What's your answer to his question about that? First, read his question, and then maybe give us your thoughts on it.
Yeah, if it was anybody else's question, I would have ignored it. But this is Beaton Finley Beaton. God, now I feel bad because I remember his name. If people don't recall, we used to have the show Care Don't Care. He was a common a listener, had comments, and I always screwed up his name no matter what. And then I look at it now, and he puts in both names here to confuse me even more. So his question was from, I'm just going to say Finley, because that's what he's going by here. Hi, Finley. Hope you're doing good. The question is there a difference between the standard period of a contract and the period where the promoter has exclusive negotiating rights? And he's referring to this because for the Ngannou contract, they had a 2-month exclusive negotiating period. Is there anything different between those 2 months and the original 2 years of the contract? Does Francis have obligations or limits as per the contract during the 2-month window? Okay, this is reference to my comments about Francis Ngannou's contract, what I think it is based on what I know. I'm kind of confident about that, to tell you the truth, but there could have been changes since I got those details. But on a typical MMA promotion contract, a typical contract, you have the terms. The terms is the duration of the contract. So you get 6 fights, and let's say 25 months to get those 6 fights. So it says in 6 fights for 25 months. And so that's the terms of the contract. When those terms are up, when you've completed all your fights or the time is up, usually there's tolling provisions in MMA contracts. The terms or duration is never really up. But in Francis's case, he supposedly has a termination date. So the terms of the contract are up. Technically, that promotional agreement is done. Now what comes is the exclusive negotiating rights period, what that means is you don't have any terms left for the fights. You don't owe the promotion any fights left, but you have a period of time, in this case, I think we said 2 months, a period of time where you can only negotiate with the previous promoter for a new contract. So there's no obligations at that point. Now, if this was another promotion with no termination date, then like I said, the terms would continue until you completed the fights or the duration was up, but they would be extending it all the time every time they offered you a fight. So in Francis' case, he has one fight. I assume that he reached that termination date after having fought only one of his 2 fights. So the terms would have ended, but for any other fighter, the terms probably would have extended, and then they wouldn't enter an exclusive negotiating period. They'd have to wait till they finish the contract, but he gets now an exclusive negotiating period for 2 months. When that's done, then you're allowed to talk to other promotions and try to sign a contract, but you're under what is a matching rights period, where the previous promoter, again, if you sign with someone else, they have the right to match those terms and retain your services by matching those. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that explains it.
It worked for me.
Okay. If Finley, if it didn't work, email me, whatever, call me. We can chat about it. We'll figure it out.
Now, I'm going to throw you a curveball because we have another listener question. This listener is me.
Okay. Wow. You do listen to the show, apparently.
I listen to the show. All right. So we're going to segue into updates on the antitrust case, and I have an antitrust question for you. Now, the payments for that are going to be going out for the Lee case, since they won their case, so they settled it out. Those payments are for being underpaid in previous fights, correct?
Technically, yes, that's what the damages are. The damages are that you were exploited by the UFC. The UFC underpaid the fighters by not compensating what they would have got in a competitive market. And so those damages are for the lower pay that the make up for some of the pay they got, what they didn't get from the UFC. So yes, underpaid.
Okay. And my question is since they paid taxes on their fights previously, will they have to pay taxes on the payments that they get, since they are for a set amount of fights for their fights that they already fought? Like the way that they determined people's payouts was, they averaged out, they showed what fights they had, etc. So because they paid taxes already, do they have to pay taxes again?
Oh yes, it's income. They put it this way: if you would have made your previous fight, you got paid $30,000 for the UFC. You made, let's say make it even simpler. You made $100,000 on 5 fights fighting for the UFC. Mm-hmm. So on that $100,000, hopefully, if you're a fighter, if you're listening, fighters, hopefully you've created an LLC. You did keep track of all your expenses, and you deduct your expenses first from that gross amount. And then after you paid off your camps and all your stuff, and let's say you have $30,000 left over, you pay taxes on that $30,000. Now you're going to get a new check for this, this hypothetical fighter that we just made up, invented. And let's say that check is going to be $60,000 you're going to get. So you're going to get a $60,000 check that's going to come over the summer. Well, that's income. Now, the good news is that's after the attorney fees. So the attorneys have taken their fees. So you don't have to pay your managers. You don't have to pay your trainers unless you want to, I guess. I mean, maybe if you sign a shitty deal and they ask for it, you're going to do it. But you shouldn't have to. Hopefully you didn't sign over the rights to your claim, so you don't have to pay some law firm 12%, that you get to keep the claim yourself. So that $60,000 is yours, but that's income, and you're going to have to pay taxes on that income. And so that's that's just the way how taxes work. Now, I think there's some deductions. I can't remember. There's some things about windfalls in lawsuits and stuff that certain things you're not taxed on. I don't think you have to pay a payroll tax at all, even though it's considered a form of income. You don't have to pay the payroll taxes. You don't have to pay your Social Security, I think, on this. So, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a tax lawyer. So I just based on trying to go on memory on what you have to pay, but you have to pay your income tax, other things. So you will have to pay taxes on this. Pay your taxes. And a reminder, the claim, this is going out tomorrow. That claim, I believe, is due Monday. So you have to get your signed claim form in Monday. If you're a fighter listening and you've not sent in your claim, send it in Monday, or you're forfeiting your claim to all the other fighters. They'll be happy to hear that you did that, but I don't think you will. So make sure you send your claim, and your signed, executed claim form has to be sent in Monday.
All right. So
By
there
Monday,
you have it, folks. Pay your taxes. All right. So there was a new update this past week in the antitrust case. What was it?
Well, it's not a huge update because we did talk about this, but it's something of interest. The plaintiffs filed their opposition, their new opposition to defendants' motion to deny class certification. What that is that they're arguing is a couple things. One is that they're arguing that the defendant being the UFC, aka Zuffa here, they're arguing that the motion the defendant filed was too late, because they'd already had pleadings, and there's a thing called Rule 12, and after that you can't argue that you can't make an argument after that of why something should be denied. Also, they're filing it too soon at the same time, this motion, according to the plaintiffs, because they haven't had a chance to go over the due discovery and make their argument about why the arbitration agreements should not be enforceable. So that's what the motion is arguing right now. And so the core of this is it's coming down. This is about the arbitration agreements. The defendant, Zuffa, the UFC, they are trying to file a motion that says the plaintiffs can't have a class action here. They can't even file this lawsuit because the Johnson class members have no standing. They have no standing because none of them, of the three named, have the arbitration agreements or class action waivers. And I guess technically even the Mikhail Serkinov, who's the new complaint, he doesn't have standing either because he signed a class action waiver. So he shouldn't even be allowed to take part in this. And so the plaintiffs are arguing that they filed this motion too soon. It's already after pleadings, or too late. Already after pleadings and too soon because they haven't had a chance to do discovery. What the plaintiffs are going to argue, and they make it clear in this motion, is in discovery they want to gather evidence that substantively and procedurally the arbitration agreements are unconscionable, and under Nevada law, and federal common law, under Nevada law, you need two parts. A contract and agreement cannot be enforceable if it's both substantive and procedurally unconscionable. So it needs both those parts. So less, and if it does not have to be as much to prove substantively, if it has a lot more evidence of procedural unconscionability in it. And to explain that, substantively means that one party had more power than the other party. Procedurally means that one party lacked opportunity. So what they're saying here is they're going to gather evidence that the UFC had so much power that they could basically force this onto the fighters. And they're also going to try to show that the fighters had no opportunity to turn down these contracts or get them amended in any way. And we will see if that'll hold up, because even though that sounds like a slam dunk, I'm sure to most people listening, they're like, oh, that's a given. The UFC, we know they have so much power. They're a monopoly. They can force fighters to accept this. There's just a long list of Nevada rulings that seem to make this an almost impossible hurdle to overcome. And we will see if the courts have maybe changed their mind a little bit about some of this.
Now, keeping in line with arbitration agreements, there was a recent ruling in an AEW lawsuit. Kevin Kelly has a nuisance case against the company, and the court basically threw it back to arbitration because there is an arbitration agreement in the contracts. Does that sort of give you pause about the UFC cases?
In this case, no, because one is to go through. One is this AEW case. The way the arbitration agreement is written, it is really clear what goes to arbitration, right? This is an individual case. It's a nuisance case, and so he's going to argue that the ability, the power of AEW to force this on them. Well, it's not a monopoly case where you're arguing that they have this monopoly power to force agreements on the defendant here, or the plaintiff, I should say, in the AEW case. Also, you can't argue he did not have the opportunity to strike that when it's a clearly defined arbitration agreement that's inserted in the contract, and that's why the court threw it out, because the type of case he's running, he's having here, he's not claiming that they have such monopoly power that they can force this on them. The case that may come up, and I believe our buddy Fred Garvin brought this up, is there is a case that the Supreme Court ruled on involving transportation workers. It's a Section 1 exemption from the Federal Arbitration Act, and it's reserved for transportation workers. But there's been some confusion. I shouldn't say confusion. Well, I guess there is some confusion because they expanded the definition of transportation workers widely to include any sort of interstate people working in interstate commerce. I'm not sure how this would apply to the UFC case. I'm sure people are picking it apart right now, trying to figure out what they can take from this to get the Supreme Court or get the courts to rule in favor of the UFC fighters, to give them some sort of exemption. But I don't, just based on my, looking at that case on my own, not speaking to, lawyers that are trained professionals in this specific type of case law, I don't see this specific case applying. But I guess that you could look at it as evidence that the Supreme Court realizes in many ways that they went too far with the arbitration agreements, that they were too lenient, too pro company over the workers when they made those series of rulings that ruled in favor of forcing arbitration agreements on people. And now they're looking for ways to perhaps claw it back. So I don't think this case would apply. But I think there's evidence that perhaps the courts themselves are looking at ways to, maybe relitigate the previous rulings they had, maybe claw back some of the power they gave to companies.
All right. So from here, we're going to move on into Canelo versus Crawford, because that has dominated the news cycle for the past week. So it's been announced that Canelo-Crawford is going to be on Netflix. It's going to be free. If you're a Netflix subscriber, you get to watch Canelo versus Crawford on the house. First, what are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, my initial thought is, I guess one big question is, what are they paying is the one thing I want to know what Netflix is paying, because this is a very, very expensive fight. The rumors float around. I think Eddie Hearn voted that 120 to 150 million is what the two guys will be getting, which doesn't seem ridiculous. It's a big fight. It's the type of fight that would sell a lot of pay-per-views, do a massive gate. And so if they're going to get paid that much, you want to get as much revenue as possible. So you want to know what they're paying, because if TKO and Turki Al-Sheikh are planning on putting these type of fights in the future on TKO or on Netflix, the price is going to be important if this is going to be a viable business model in the future. Now, DAZN, remember, was paying Canelo $40 million, was giving Golden Boy, I should say, $40 million for every bout that they had with Canelo on DAZN. Of that $40 million, $35 million went to Canelo, who also got to keep a big piece of the gate, got to keep some sponsorship of his own. So he was making well over $35 million for every fight. And there was a carve out in the contract that if he fought Triple G under that deal, he would have got an additional $25 million. So $60 million would have been his pay purse from just the broadcast rights for a Triple G bout under that previous agreement. So does Netflix pay a similar amount? They're paying supposedly like $75 million plus for NFL games. The Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson bout what I had heard is the two together made about 60 million combined, but that includes the gate and probably some sponsorship. So, that you deduct, that sounds like they're paying kind of like the fee that DAZN was paying for Canelo. So that's my number one question, is what they're paying, because if you're another promotion, if you're someone trying to get on Netflix and you don't have someone like Turki Al-Sheikh underwriting the whole thing, will apparently lose tens of millions, does, as great as Netflix is, as great as it can reach a wide audience, it is potentially a money loser for fights like this, because these fights sell north of 1 million in pay-per-view buys, and 1 million pay-per-views at the boxing rate and split is like $60 million right there. So that would be my number one question, is what do they pay? Also, the exclusivity is my other question. How much is Netflix and how much is TKO asking for exclusivity? I'm sure Netflix wants some, that they're going to be the only broadcaster of this event worldwide because they're trying to get new markets. But as much as I know that that the TKO and the way they work with their other properties is they want to be the only person that can put events on Netflix. From my understanding, is Netflix makes it clear they do not want to have any sort of exclusivity on these type of projects. They want to be able to pick and choose big events, which is a little different than how TKO normally does business with the UFC and their other properties and WWE. But the other thing I want to know is, I guess, how much Netflix wants to dive deep into boxing and into potentially UFC, which I'm sure we'll talk later, because Greg Peters talked about how they're looking at these smaller sports like they did with WWE, and how with the Netflix reach, they can blow them up. And so my other curious thing that's in my mind is how, that now that we have had the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson event, we're going to have Serrano Taylor 3. And then this, it seems like they are more than willing to keep to put on boxing events. So I'm wondering how much further they're willing to go with these events. So those are my questions.
It's rumored that the event, and we must consider the source, mind you, it is Oscar De La Hoya, but still, he's saying that the event that Canelo versus Crawford is going to happen in the afternoon. And that is possibly to allow Noche UFC to avoid competing with Canelo versus Crawford. Does that sound plausible to you?
It does sound plausible that it is in the afternoon or late afternoon. I don't see why or how they would do that on behalf of Noche. Netflix, I'm sure, doesn't give a rat's ass about that event. I am also sure that UFC and TKO, the parent company of the UFC, is much more concerned of keeping Netflix happy than making a good Noche event. They've already moved it to a fight night. I'm sure they want to keep ESPN happy too, because they want to have them continue to negotiate for potential pay-per-views. But I don't see them bending over backwards. What I think is conceivable, though, is Netflix, as a free broadcaster, is looking at the Eastern time zone and Western and saying, for us, it's better for the main card to perhaps start, let's say, at 5:00 in the afternoon. And that way it starts at 7 on the East, or 8 on the East Coast. So 2 hours earlier than is typical for these events. And that's possible because if you're trying to get the biggest audience possible, including those with kids and family, you might want it earlier. And what boxing and MMA and UFC is trying to do when they sell these pay-per-views is they often delay these events. They're trying to get people, they're going out for the night. They're trying to get the pay-per-view buyers, which is a different audience than the primetime largest audience possible. So I think it's conceivable that they want to start the event earlier than typical, merely because they want to reach the widest audience possible. And Noche will start at the typical UFC time. Maybe they'll even bump it back, typical pay-per-view time, which would mean that there's not as much overlap. And that's kind of like by luck more than design. That would be my guess. I could be wrong. Maybe, you know what? Maybe they're thinking Noche is so important to us that we have to move this $100+ million, potentially hundreds of $1 million event. That's the future of the TKO boxing enterprise with the Saudis. We have to move that up to make space for a fight night. Possible, but I don't see that as likely.
I love the sting of for a fight night. I love that. All right. What do you think other boxing promoters are thinking of Dana White and TKO promoting this event?
Well, we saw Oscar De La Hoya when his clapback video. He obviously was not happy. He had some unkind words to Dana White being involved. You could tell he sounded a little hurt in many ways that they're going to have Dana White come in, who's never done a boxing match event, be a promoter for this mass events for the Saudis. So he does not seem happy. We also had Eddie Hearn being interviewed by Hawani talking about it, and he tried to put on a brave face, but you could also tell there's a little bit of hurt there. That jealousy perhaps, but also I think they waking up to the idea, as much as they're trying to pretend it's business as usual, as much as they're trying to pretend that it's just, Dana White's just another promoter, that they chose him because he's more famous in the United States or some other reason. I think they're well aware that this is potentially the Saudis throwing the massive amount of money they have behind TKO instead of them, and that's got to be nerve-wracking because the Saudis have been the only source of financing lately. They have taken boxing off the other networks, helped move it to DAZN, and it should be noted too, with the amount of effort that they're putting into Netflix, they obviously view Netflix as a superior platform to DAZN. And so if they were so gung-ho on DAZN, they would have moved this event, put this event on DAZN, because it would have been a driver to subscribers. I think they're well aware that DAZN is kind of dead weight. It's just a backup plan for them right now. And that's why the Saudis and TKO moved this to Netflix. But I think that's a signal right there, because you don't invest into something and then think it's the future and then not put your hot property on it. And so I think they're rightfully concerned that the major source of financing for boxing right now, the major source that's driven all of them to a shitty platform they're not even going to use for this event, is perhaps throwing their resources behind someone else. So I'm sure none of them are happy.
A report from the MMA Draw, Blake Avignon, he's Bobby S. Axelrod on Twitter, says that Nick Khan was the one that actually saved the Netflix Canelo-Crawford event. What do you make of that? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!